I'm going somewhere with this, I promise.
Quantum Leap. Welcome, everyone. We are gathered together today to discuss Quantum Leap Season 1, Episode 15 of the 2022 revival, this one entitled Ben's Song for the Defense. And I can't believe I'm saying it, but we are now 3 weeks in a row with new episodes back to back to back. It must be some sort of miracle. If you find yourself new here or have otherwise forgotten, there are spoilers ahead. If you're not interested in those, please bow out now. Otherwise, let's continue on with the show. This episode picks up with Ben leaping into the mid-1980s, 1985 I believe, into the body of a public defender in mid-trial. As you would expect, it takes Ben a moment to figure out what's going on, so of course that's where the miscommunications and the shenanigans can ensue. What's interesting about this episode, and I'll go into the story a little bit later, one of the things that I kind of mentioned a couple episodes would be interesting to see is someone else being brought into the imaging chamber. I thought that would have made sense a couple of episodes ago. They didn't do it. But here, we actually get an entire subplot going on where Addison trades off for Jen, and Jen comes in to be the holographic guide simply because she has more insight and more legal expertise in this situation. No, she's not actually a lawyer. She's obviously a criminal on the other side of the law, but she did receive a law degree whilst she was in jail. And there's all sorts of these court cases and situations going on throughout the episode that she's able to help with a little bit of insight. But we also get to see the entire team back at Quantum Leap headquarters researching and digging into things and finding out. And I mentioned last episode, that's a nice touch. I like to see what this crew is doing on the leaps, providing the information. This is what we have to imagine was happening in the original Quantum Leap. When Al would come back with more information and provide that to Sam, we just had to imagine this is what was happening. So I do like that. This actually gives our Quantum Leap crew a definitive purpose, and they're not just floundering around because we need to fill screen time with them. They're actually functioning in the leap itself. They're actually feeling like that family, that close-knit group of friends like they were mentioned as earlier in the show, and that kind of hasn't really made itself that apparent. They have this nice interaction with each other. Once Ben meets Jen, he doesn't remember her, but he has heard stories from Addison, but he does remember, based on a story Jen tells him, who Magic is. Nice little touches, and I'm wondering why we didn't get such things kind of in the mid portion of the show. It seems like it's been a little while since we've seen this sort of reaction and this sort of interaction, and again, no Jan is present, so I'm wondering if this was either an earlier filmed episode, something from the original point of the show, or if this is a newly filmed series of events and they took some criticism and started to implement these people more directly. I would like to note that Ian in this episode in particular seems to have longer hair and look quite a bit more like the Ian in the drawing from a few episodes ago. I don't know if that was intentional or if Ian's hair just grew naturally over time, or if they're trying to imply that Ian is becoming ever closer to the Leaper version that we saw in that drawing from another person who was leapt into. Also, we get a very, very small mention of the whole Martinez thing at the very beginning. Ben tells Addison he was there. She says, we know, we were able to see it on our screens, all that stuff. And Ziggy is currently working on a way or a procedure for them to be able to, I guess, figure out where Martinez is leaping, but if there is also another leaper currently in the time zone where Ben has leapt. One other thing at the very end of this episode that was very interesting and I really enjoyed was we got to see the crew, after Ben has leapt, trying to figure out where he has gone. It's not an instantaneous thing, so they're kind of searching the computers, searching the logs, trying to figure out exactly where in time Ben currently is. And that, I believe, is not really something we've had to interact with much in the past. It showed our team spending a little time figuring this out, and it gave them a little bonding moment before they are able to interact with Ben again, where from Ben's perspective, and this is another thing we don't really get to interact with because the episode tends to cut off, but we don't really get that sense from watching episode to episode that Ben is at this consistently and constantly. He doesn't have these breaks. He's going instantaneously from one leap to the next leap to the next leap. He hasn't even gotten the chance to sleep since he began leaping, and that must be taking a toll on him. His memory loss, constantly being thrown into these fish out of water scenarios. Even when he is in his element, they must be frustrating and a little bit hard to deal with because it's constantly a pressure cooker situation, constantly dealing with that adrenaline, that problem solving. So it's probably a similar situation to somebody in a combat zone who is continuously being put in danger time after time after time without any real rest. And I have to imagine at some point in time in an episode down the road, that's going to come back to bite him in the butt. But I actually didn't mean to do that. But, this episode had a relatively fun storyline. Obviously, it was a typical kind of lawyer down on her luck, and she's not necessarily the best lawyer, and then we find out that these public defender attorneys, which we've seen in a lot of other shows, are basically just there to get the job done and move on to the next case. They're not necessarily there to win. There's a side character, another attorney there that's giving advice, and this was eventually just kind of dropped. And I haven't really looked into it, but was this supposed to be a character we know? Was this supposed to be a specific version of somebody that was a reference to real life? Or was it just a person there to give her a couple pieces of wisdom and then move on? Because, I don't know, it felt like they were setting this person up to be more important, and then there was no resolution to that story. We got the main case Ben was trying to solve here. A boy, I believe he was just 18, who was wrongly convicted of murder. But because of the whole situation going on, there was gangs involved. There was a family this guy needed to protect. He was the chief caretaker for his grandmother and his younger brother, who in the original timeline would go on to join a gang and die within that gang before he was released from jail. This is what Ben is trying to solve. We get a whole bunch of scenarios going on where there's side stories where Ben has to help out other people, and it's basically task to task, running around like a chicken with her head cut off. There's no possible way you could do this, and they even come to this conclusion that there was no possible way this public defender could have actually solved this in the original timeline. We didn't have the technology yet. She didn't have the resources. There's no possible way one person could do all of this caseload by herself in the legal system that's been built up. And we didn't even have DNA yet. In the original timeline, they were able to solve this crime 10 years down the road based on DNA evidence on the gun that was not even found for, I think, 11 years. Ben takes it upon himself to go find the gun early and turn it over to ballistics evidence. Meanwhile, we find out the girlfriend of Ben's character works for the opposing law firm, and she's 1 year away from actually leveling up. So they're kind of secretly dating because they don't want everyone to know, and we find out there's some fishy stuff going on. Eventually, in the original timeline, this was found out, but because it hasn't been found out yet, they are also going to have to try and get this evidence. Her girlfriend ends up losing her job over it. When things are once again set right, they go on to found this organization that really helps out people in the future who are wrongly convicted or otherwise didn't have enough chances to get their stories heard, things like that. The one twist I really enjoyed in this episode was when basically they were given a last-ditch effort, a final plea when the opposing prosecutors decide to, we'll give you the best possible plea deal that's ever been given. He'll be out of prison in 4 years. Isn't that great? Ziggy comes back saying, actually, everything works out great. If you take this plea deal right now, basically everything's going to be fine. He'll go to prison for 4 years, but you know what? His brother doesn't die because he wasn't in prison long enough, and they will move along, put their lives back together, and go on to do great things. Ben says, you know what? This isn't good enough. He doubles down, potentially creating a more catastrophic event if he fails in this situation. Obviously, this is Quantum Leap. Things go to plan. Things go well. I was a bit on the edge of my seat thinking they might actually pull the rug out and go the poor direction and have Ben make this choice, and things went horribly wrong. Things didn't always work out for the best in the original Quantum Leap, although they did 98.5% of the time, I would say. So to throw this curveball in here now could have set some things up down the road. I still think it might be setting things up down the road, but it was a nice touch to have this little extra thing in there where you got a good result, you changed history enough, but it's not enough for Ben, and it wasn't enough for Jen. And it was nice to see this character development and this storyline from Jen, because she's kind of been sidelined for most of the time. She's played a role here and there, but she hasn't really had her time to shine. She's not comfortable. She's out of her element. This isn't her thing, and I think that's a very refreshing characteristic to have in this show. It's very, very wonderful to have this character thrust into a role she's not great at, and she, in my opinion, did a fantastic job with that. Overall, the main storyline wasn't the deepest thing I've ever seen, but there was so much going on, so much action, so many little hits and bumps here and there. They were throwing things all over the place. So I think overall it was so jam-packed and action-packed, you didn't really have a moment to breathe, so you don't have the time to sit down and think just how thin the story really is. And it really worked out well for me because I thought it was a very enjoyable episode. After last episode that was really, really good in my opinion, this one was a nice change of pace, and I think the last 3 episodes, different types of Quantum Leap, different flavors. So to have these episodes back to back to back after the show is returned, I think we're back on form, and hopefully the show will end up fantastic with the season 1 finale, whenever that's coming. I don't even remember how many episodes we're up to now because they kept adding some. Do we have 20 now? Either way, I really like this. I'm hoping we get some more reveals going forward. I'm hoping we get more for our characters to do. And next episode looks very intriguing. I think there's going to be some sort of mental shenanigans going on. It looks like Ben has leapt inside somebody who is already having mental problems, so that most likely isn't going to be beneficial. It looks like there's going to be some quackery, some medical experimentation type stuff, you know, old school lobotomy type stuff. So I can't wait to see where they go with that. But what did you think of this episode? Are you enjoying Quantum Leap? Did you think this episode was a return to form, or are you just done with the show? Leave all your thoughts down below. While you're there, leave a like, do a share, hit the subscribe, do all those things that YouTube people tell you to do, because apparently it's something that actually helps. But until next time...
Okay, I think I should probably go.